Welcome, students. Today we are going to discuss the political ideas of one of the greatest masters of Western political thought, Plato. Plato, along with his student Aristotle, laid the foundations of Greek political thought, which, in the course of history, laid the foundations of the entire tradition of Western political thought. What remains persistent to us today is that even 2000 years after the time of Plato, we are beginning our discussion on Western political thought with a discussion of this man. Plato raised certain pertinent questions regarding the qualities of the ideal man, the ideal citizen, and the ideal state, which are the chief concerns of Western political thinkers even to this day. That is why any student who proposes to study or understand Western political thought cannot do so without actually becoming aware of the ideas once propounded by this great man. Plato was born in 427 BC in a city-state called Athens in the Greek Empire. Now, what is a city-state exactly? A city-state is a small or a moderately sized administrative unit which had its own unique economic setup, its own political setup, its own unique cultural traits. Now, these city-states, or polis as they were called in the local language, formed the administrative unit of a huge or vast empire like the Greek Empire. The Greek Empire consisted of many such city-states like Athens, Thebes, Sparta, Corinth. Now, you would want to believe that these city-states, since they were part of a single empire, might have had a very mutually friendly relationship amongst each other, but no. Each of these city-states actually had a very competitive relationship with the other. The survival of one was often assured on the basis of being able to exploit the other. Athens happened to be one of the most prosperous, economically and politically stable, strong city-states of Greece. Plato was born in an aristocratic family in Athens, and he was privy to the best kind of education and training that any person born into the nobility would automatically have access to. He grew up to be a strong man, fought battles for his city-state, was even awarded for his bravery in one of those battles. Plato perhaps even nurtured dreams of entering the government of his city-state, when unfortunately Athens entered into a 3-decade-long war with one of its neighboring city-states known as Sparta. This war, which came down to be recorded in history as the Peloponnesian War, lasted for close to 3 decades and ended in the ruination, the absolute economic and political ruination of Plato's beloved Athens. Against this background, it will become easier for students of politics to understand why Plato kept on searching for an ideal city-state which would be able to stand various external onslaughts, sometimes violent, sometimes politically motivated, sometimes militarily motivated. Nonetheless, Plato's search for stable political system continued unabated in the background of the Peloponnesian War and the defeat that it inflicted upon his beloved motherland. The other influence that Plato could not dismiss for a major part of his living years was that of his master, his mentor, Socrates. Plato met Socrates at the young age of 20 and was completely taken in by Socrates' search for knowledge, for wisdom, and for the methods that Socrates used in order to arrive at knowledge or wisdom. His methods, for instance, the dialectical method, which was first used and developed by Socrates, would be found in Plato time and again and would make him famous, his works famous. And he is one student who would make Socrates proud in the years to come. Now, keeping in mind these 2 points, the point of the defeat of Athens at the hands of Sparta in the Peloponnesian War and the point of the influence of Socrates in mind, we move into our discussion for this present schedule, which is Plato's idea of justice. We will find his ideas regarding justice in one of his most well-known works, which is the Republic. The Republic is a book which was written by Plato between 380 to 370 BC. It is a book which comes in the form, or rather which is written in the form of dialogues, otherwise known as the dialectical method, influenced by the method that Socrates used with the people that he questioned in order to arrive at answers. In the Republic, which Plato writes in a dialogue form, we find that through the character of Socrates, Plato voices his opinions regarding justice. In a room full of some 6 or 7 people, Plato arranges for a conversation, an imaginary conversation, in which some of his most well-known contemporaries are present. Each of these contemporaries or characters voice their opinion regarding justice. Plato, using Socrates as a mouthpiece, puts forward his logic for not agreeing with these other participants in the conversation. And finally, at the end of the conversation, we shall arrive at what Plato exactly means by justice. The conversation regarding justice begins with Cephalus stating that according to him, justice means speaking the truth, being honest in word and deed, and paying one's debts. As soon as Socrates hears this, he says that speaking the truth is good under general universal circumstances, but there might be certain particular circumstances in which speaking the truth might actually end up doing more harm than good. Would it then be just to speak the truth knowing that I'm going to cause harm? He also raises a situation, an imaginary situation, in which he asks Cephalus to consider a particular situation, saying that X, who possesses a particularly dangerous weapon, goes to his friend Y, asks his friend Y to keep his weapon for some time on his behalf, and after the passage of some time, due to some unfortunate circumstances, X happens to lose his sanity. After losing his sanity, he comes back to his friend, asks for his weapon back. Would it be just for the friend, which is Y in our case, to return the dangerous weapon to X, knowing that he has lost his mental stability or sanity? Would returning or paying one's debts, in this case, also be just, be good, or be moral? The answer obviously is no. Seeing Cephalus being defeated at his own argument by Socrates, his son Polemarchus enters the argument. He says that justice means giving each man his due, or doing good to one's friends and harming one's enemies. Once again, Socrates jumps at the opportunity. He says that definitely each man should get what he deserves or what is due to him, and definitely it would be good to do good to one's friends. But harming one's enemies, could that ever be called just or moral? The answer that Socrates provides is in the negative. He says that a man who is just will not harm anybody, not even his enemies. Once again, Socrates' point is made, and at this juncture, Thrasymachus enters the conversation. He says that across time and place, justice has meant the protection of the interests of the stronger. In other words, might is right, as we are all familiar with the adage. he believes that across societies, across time and place, it is the stronger people who have always been able to establish their interest upon the majority sections of society who are definitely relatively weaker than them, as in the form of laws, as justice. Once again, Socrates interrupts Thrasymachus. He says that people who possess power do not need to establish their interests over the weaker at all, simply because they are more powerful than the weaker anyway. And secondly, people who possess power would also have a moral duty towards protecting the interests of the weaker rather than exploiting the weaker. At this juncture, Glaucon enters the conversation. He interrupts Socrates and he says that justice is not at all a natural virtue, a virtue which is instinctive or spontaneous within human beings. In fact, he states that during the pre-political stage, the stage of the state of nature, where there was no artificial political institution, the situation was such that usually the minority few ended up dominating the majority weak, right? A contract was required which would lay certain limitations upon the activities of the stronger, which would in turn regulate the amount of exploitation that the weaker would have to undergo. Thus, according to Glaucon, justice was artificially created in order to minimize the sufferings of the weaker. Adeimantus supports Glaucon by saying that justice was usually the interest of the stronger, which was imposed upon the weaker in the form of moral codes, ethics, law, religion. In other words, both of them ended up supporting Thrasymachus, saying that justice was nothing but the protection of the interests of the stronger. Plato absolutely rejects this particular construction of justice, and he makes two very important points at this particular juncture. He says that the state as a social political organization was created in order to ensure that mutual cooperation existed amongst individuals, because he considered men to be social animals, gregarious by nature, who would need human company for sustenance as well as improvement or development. That's the first point. Secondly, he said that no individual, no matter how talented or how very powerful he was, could satisfy all his needs by himself. Therefore, men would need to live in society. The state was the product of this need of human nature. Thus, Socrates establishes two very important points regarding the nature of the state. A, the state is an organization based upon mutual cooperation of men, and B, the state is simultaneously based upon specialization of labor. No man can do all work equally well. Therefore, each man should do what he does best. After having made these two very important observations regarding the nature of state, Plato, through Socrates, puts forward what is known as his theory of three classes and three souls. Plato says that there are three kinds of qualities that are usually found in individual souls. The first quality that Plato talks about is that of wisdom. This quality is possessed by such individuals who have the corresponding virtue of knowledge. Such people are definitely few in number, who are intellectually inclined to the extent of being capable of acquiring the highest knowledge regarding common good. The second quality that Plato talks about in human souls is that of spirit. souls which possess spirit automatically enable individuals to have the virtue of courage or bravery. Such courage and bravery as to enable these individuals to exhibit extreme physical strength, valor, bravery in war, and the general function of protection or protecting of society. The third quality that Plato talks about in human souls is that of appetite. Souls which are appetitive by nature automatically possess the virtue of temperance. By appetite, we generally understand the need or the will to consume. This sort of soul simultaneously has to practice or have temperance. Temperance refers to moderation, which means that Plato is referring to the producer category of people in a society who are inclined to be artisans or farmers by nature, producing such materials which are beneficial or required for the sustenance of society, as well as providing any such service to the other two category of people in society which would help them to survive and to lead good lives, lead comfortable lives. Now, if we follow this tripartite division of the human soul closely, we will realize that corresponding to each quality of soul and virtue of individual, we can identify a social class. For instance, the first quality that Plato had spoken about was reason. Reason which corresponded to the virtue of search for knowledge, capability of acquiring knowledge. Corresponding to these two qualities, Plato identified the class of rulers. The second quality of human soul that Plato identified was spirit, which engendered the quality or virtue of bravery or courage. Corresponding to these two qualities, we can identify the social class of soldiers, whom Plato calls auxiliaries, whose main function would be to afford protection to the entire society, protection both from internal disturbances as well as from external aggression. The third quality that Plato had identified was appetite, corresponding to which he had also identified the virtue of temperance or moderation. Now, this would create the corresponding social class of artisans or farmers, or more simply speaking, the producing classes. The fourth quality which Plato thus far had not spoken about, he identified to be justice. Justice would be the fourth and the most important quality of human soul and simultaneously of human society. Justice would enable the individual to attain a harmonious relationship both with his own self as well as with that of the rest of society. How so? According to Plato, justice is that intrinsic quality of the human soul which distinguishes him from all other living organisms or even sociable creatures. When a person is just by nature, he learns to acknowledge the capability that his soul possesses. In any individual at any point of time, all three qualities of the soul would not dominate. Usually, it would be one of the qualities that dominated a particular individual. As long as that individual managed to stay true to that one particular quality and performed functions in relation or in correspondence with that particular quality, he would be doing justice to himself, to his own capabilities, to his own merit, to his own aptitude. As soon as an individual tried to do something which he was not meant to do or not capable of doing, he would be creating or giving rise to injustice. So much so that if a person stopped another individual from doing what that individual was best suited for doing, then he would be committing injustice. So at the individual level, the harmonization of one's capabilities with one's actions is what Plato identified as justice. Moving on to the level of the state. The state creates conditions in which each man does what he can do best. Whichever quality of the soul it is that predominates a particular individual, when an individual is able to perform only such duties and functions which his soul is suited to, then alone we can say that the state is being just. Thus, a state is just only when it creates a condition which is conducive for allowing a man to do what he does best. Plato proposes the maxim, one class, one duty, one man, one work, which means that one man could not probably multitask, because Plato believed that a person was capable of doing any one thing very well at a given point of time. That is how his soul was created by nature. Now, this tripartite division of the soul and corresponding tripartite division of the society was essentially hierarchical in nature, because wisdom and knowledge automatically dominated over spirit and courage or bravery, as well as over appetite and temperance. Now, why would common people accept this particular hierarchical and seemingly unchangeable hierarchical arrangement of society? In order to make his tripartite division of the soul more acceptable to common people, Plato proposes what is known as the myth of the metals or the noble lie. Plato says that since the bodies of human beings are made from earth and there are various metals which are mixed in the earth, particular metals are predominant in the physical composition of particular people. For instance, he says that the highest rung of society, which is occupied by the ruling class who are wise and knowledgeable, have a predominance of the metal gold. Similarly, the second class of society, the second rung of society, which comprises of the soldiers or the warriors, basically the ones who are protecting society, in them the metal silver predominates. And for the rest of society, the producing classes, the metal bronze predominates. Now, this would be more easily comprehensible as well as more easily understandable for common people to realize and to accept that they were perhaps, if someone belonged to the lowest rung of society, it would be easier for that person to understand that they were of an inferior order as compared to the topmost rung of society, and that would help them to accept Plato's hierarchical division of society. Thus, we can safely conclude this particular discussion on Plato's theory of justice by saying that for Plato, justice was a virtue which was immensely important because it helped the individual to adjust with his own needs and desires at the level of the self, as well as to adjust with the needs of society. He believed that when each individual did what was best for himself, only then alone could there be peace, development, order, and justice in society. Why was it important to establish justice in society? Because only when justice prevailed in society could each man realize his best self. Thus, the state became an organization with an ethical purpose. It was not just a political organization. It was not just an organization for the sake of organizing or maintaining laws, rules, etc., but rather it was an organization created for the purpose of allowing each man to become his best self. Of course, critics have argued that Plato's theory of justice is impractical, that it is status quoist, that it gives too much of importance upon knowledge or wisdom, and it does not at all give any emphasis or merit to any other quality possessed by any other individual. Some of these criticisms do need to be acknowledged, but despite these criticisms, we cannot negate Plato's contribution to the theory and the conception of justice, which still happens to be one of the best conceptions of justice created till date. Thank you.